We've got a Toro Titan MX4880 here. Customer said that the battery will not stay charged on it no matter what he does. Says he can jump start it or charge it up and it'll usually stay charged until he turns it off and tries to restart it. So I'm going to show you how to get that taken care of and what causes something like that on a mower like this. This has the Kawasaki FR651V on it. Good engines. First thing I like to do on something like this, if we're having issues, is check all of the wires going to both the ground and the solenoid. So your solenoid sits up underneath on here, and it'll be where your positive battery cable goes to. Now you can see there's two wires that go to it. One goes to your starter and one comes from the battery itself. Make sure all these wires on here are tight. If they're not tight, you will not get good voltage through. And a lot of times this charging wire coming back to the battery that's connected to the same terminal, if that's not tight, it's not going to get a good charge. So check those, and then also check on the negative side of the battery cable where it goes back and connects to the frame or to the engine. You'll want to check that ground wire also. Again, if that's not tight, good voltage not coming through, and it will not act like it should. We're going to check the battery now that we've tested all that and make sure these cables are tight. See this negative wire? See if I can't get a little bit closer. The negative wire is just kind of flopping around, as far as I can tell. Just kind of flopping around there. That is not tight enough to get a good connection back through and to charge the battery. Is that all the issue this thing has? I highly doubt it. Okay. This battery I did charge up last night. I left it on a 10 amp charge for about an hour to an hour and a half. And now I get 10.5 volts. So that tells us this battery definitely isn't in very good shape. We're going to jump it here down to, just to test it, we're going to quote that battery as being bad to the customer. We're just going to test everything else out. Now from there, I'm going to give us enough juice to go ahead and start it. We're leaning towards this battery obviously being bad, but what we want to check is we want to check the charging system at this point. We want to make sure that the charging system is working correctly. If it's working correctly, then all we've got to do is replace the battery and we'll be good to go. If it's not working correctly, we've got to address that issue and figure out why this battery went bad. A lot of times the batteries will go bad because the charging system isn't working right and you keep draining down that battery as you're using the mower. Just completely kills the battery. When we fire this up, we're going to test the battery voltage after we turn the battery charger off and see what it goes to. It's at 14.54 right now, 14 right in there. After we start this and take the battery charger off, it should go up to about 14.1, 14.2 or 3, somewhere in there as far as the voltage. Guess I gotta crank that back up to a 40 volt. Get this started. Not making a real good connection. test AC voltage out of those to figure out whether you're getting good voltage or not. Test across those two real quick. We're getting 27 volts at full RPM to the stator, which sits here and attaches to the regulator. Now this is the wire going to the battery. That's the wire that actually comes off of the regulator back to ground. If you test it DC volts, looks like I'm getting 6.37 right now. The regulator can be tested using an ohms meter and by testing back across the different terminals to one another and reading your meter and what value you get, ohms resistance. That'll tell you for sure if the regulator is good or it's bad. Now that we've tested everything, I'll explain those numbers a little bit more here shortly. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to test for a parasitic load draw on the battery. Now I've got this new battery hooked up, it's fully charged and everything. All I've done is left the negative terminal off. Now I've got the key turned off, got the key out at this point. I'm going to go between the two terminals. Oop, I got to switch my meter. I'm going to go to a DC 10 amp draw, DCA. It'll have a straight line with three short lines under it, I believe is how they normally mark it. Now I'm going to start at the 10 amp, which is the highest setting, and then I'm going to work my way down. Now when you touch that to the piece there, when you touch the negative, that needle shouldn't bounce at all. Now I'm a little bit shaky, so it's moving, but it's not moving up and down when I touch that. Now you can go down to lower milliamp settings and go one at a time. You don't want to pop the fuse, but if you get any bouncing out of any of these lower settings at all, you know you have a parasitic load draw. You know something's drawing off your battery. Now if I put it back on the 10 amp, I'll show you what it looks like if you have a load draw. I'm just going to turn the key to on, which would turn on your auxiliary like your solenoid and things like that. You can see the needle, how it bounces, how it goes up and down when you move that or when you install it. That's how it's going to look. Now if you're on your lower milliamps, it's going to be a lot more pronounced. It's not working exactly the way I expected it to, but either way, that's how you test your draw. It doesn't look like we're getting any draw at all from this. So the voltage coming from under the stator. Now, or coming from the stator under the flywheel. Now that's one of the most important voltages because it sends that voltage to the regulator, and that's what charges your battery. Now if it's not getting enough AC voltage, it comes AC out from under the flywheel. If it's not getting enough AC voltage, that regulator can't properly work at all. Now if it is getting good voltage and the regulator isn't outputting good voltage, that's also going to be a problem, quite obviously. We got 27 volts or so coming out from under the flywheel. Now it says anywhere from 26 to 34, I believe, and I don't even know that it gives you a top end on them. Let me see. So it says 26 to 34 volts at 3,000 RPM. Coil resistance should be 0.1 to 0.14 ohms. Should be 14.1 to 15 volts DC output voltage. Now when I tested the voltage on this coming out of the regulator, you'll remember I only got about 12.95 volts without this red wire hooked up. Now the battery was completely bad on the other one, and you saw as soon as I plugged that in that the battery voltage jumped up to almost 19 volts. That tells me we have a bad cell or something of some sort, to where the regulator wasn't recognizing that or was trying to charge it and the battery wasn't taking it. The correct way to test this is with it hooked up to a good battery, which we have installed now. I just went ahead and hooked up that negative again, but we've installed that battery. Now we're going to fire this thing up, start it off with good voltage, and see what we get out of the regulator back to the battery. Now 27 to 34 volts at 3000 RPM. That's great. And we got 27, so it's right in there. We got 12.58 volts. Let's fire it up. So now I'm getting 13.93 coming right out of the regulator. I hope that wasn't vibrating real bad as I was doing that. I looked down at the very end of it, saw it was kind of vibrating back and forth pretty good, so hopefully that wasn't the case. Either way, I was testing back to the positive, both at the battery and then also at the positive down here on the regulator. Now I was getting about almost 14 volts. We're going to call that regulator good, as that's about what it calls for. Just above 14. We're almost to 14. That thing's operating like it should as long as it's keeping a good charge. We won't need to replace that regulator. So the charging system all checks out. All of the connections and everything check out. Just a bad battery here in this case. We're probably a bad cell causing this to happen. You will want to make note on this regulator. I see it a lot where people don't realize that there's a ground wire that hooks onto one of the bolts. So this one has it at the top side here. It's just a ground wire that goes from the top back to ground to the engine. Now there's always either that or a metal band on these, no matter the brand, make, or model. That regulator needs to be grounded out in order for it to work correctly. Make sure that that's there. I see a lot of people replace them and try to trace down issues, and it's a case of just a simple wire missing. Hopefully that helps you out with diagnosing and taking care of an issue where your battery will not stay charged, keeps dying, and won't start after it sits. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.